Imagine waking up tomorrow with no clock, no phone, no watch, no glowing numbers beside your bed. How would you know if you'd overslept? How would you meet a friend at 3 o'clock if no one on earth could agree when 3 o'clock even was? For almost the entire history of our species, this was ordinary life. There were no minutes, no seconds, no ticking hands, and yet people still woke, worked, prayed, traded, and met on time. This is the story of how humans learned to measure the one thing you can never see, hold, or stop: time itself. The very first clock hung in the sky. For thousands of years, the sun was the only timekeeper anyone needed. When it rose, you woke. When it climbed to its highest point, it was midday. When it set, the day was done. Our ancestors learned to read the sun's slow arc and the shadows it threw across the ground, shadows that stretched long in the morning, shrank to almost nothing at noon, and reached out again by evening. A single stick pushed into the earth became the world's first clock. As the sun moved, the stick's shadow swept across the ground like the hand of a giant dial. From that simple idea grew the sundial. The ancient Egyptians raised towering stone obelisks whose shadows tracked the hours across a public square. Later, craftsmen carved elegant dials of stone and bronze, etched with fine lines so a shadow could reveal the hour with surprising accuracy. For thousands of years, the sundial was the most precise clock on Earth, but it had one fatal flaw. The instant a cloud slid over the sun, or the moment the sun went down, the sundial went blind. To measure time in the dark, or on a gray winter's day, people needed something that did not depend on the sky at all. The answer was water. Let water drip at a steady rate from one vessel into another, and the changing level marks the passing of time in daylight, in darkness, in rain or shine. This was the water clock, and it is astonishingly ancient. The Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese, and Persians all built them. The Greeks called it the clepsydra, the water thief. In the courts of Athens, a water clock timed the speeches of lawyers so that no one could ramble on for too long. And some water clocks grew breathtakingly complex. In 11th century China, an official named Su Song built a water-powered clock tower 3 stories high, filled with gears and turning wheels that rang bells and moved figures to mark the hours. For the very first time, humanity could measure the night. Others chose to measure time by burning it. A candle marked with evenly spaced rings became a clock. As the flame ate down past each line, another hour had gone. In China, people burned sticks and trails of incense laid out in careful patterns, some even threaded with tiny weights that dropped onto a metal plate with a sharp ping to sound an alarm. Time, quite literally, drifted away as smoke. Then came one of the most elegant timekeepers ever devised, the hourglass. To glass bulbs, a slender neck, and a measured amount of sand that slipped from top to bottom in a fixed span. Silent, simple, and unbothered by cloud or wind, it was perfect for the one place a sundial or water clock could never survive: the pitching deck of a ship. For centuries, sailors ran their entire day by the turning of the glass. And when a preacher climbed into his pulpit, a great hourglass was often turned beside him, so the whole congregation could see exactly how long they were meant to sit and listen. But what about the dead of night, far from any candle or flame? For that, people looked up. The stars wheel across the sky in a slow, flawless circle, turning around the fixed point of the pole star. To a trained eye, the constellations were a vast clock face spread across the heavens. Sailors, monks, and travelers learned to read the hour from the stars, and clever handheld instruments were made to measure the turning night sky like the dial of a watch. Here, though, we meet something truly strange, something that would drive a modern person to despair. For most of history, an hour was not a fixed length of time at all. Many people simply divided the daylight into 12 equal parts and the night into 12 more. But daylight is long in summer and short in winter. So a daytime hour in June was far longer than a daytime hour in December. The hours themselves stretched and shrank with the seasons. The idea that an hour should always be exactly the same length, 60 unchanging minutes, all year round, was still a long way off. And here is something else we forget. For almost all of history, ordinary people owned no clock of any kind. They didn't need one. Time was something the whole community shared, called out loud for everyone at once. In Christian Europe, the church bell ruled the day, ringing out the hours for prayer and labor. In the Muslim world, the muezzin called the faithful to prayer 5 times a day. Town criers walked the streets announcing the hour aloud. To learn the time, you did not glance at your wrist, you stopped, and you listened. Then, in the Middle Ages, everything changed. Somewhere among the monasteries and towns of medieval Europe, inventors built a machine that would reshape human life, the mechanical clock. Its beating heart was a brilliant little device called the escapement, a mechanism that released the pull of a falling weight in tiny, even, ticking steps, so a wheel turned at a steady, controlled pace. These first great clocks were huge iron machines mounted in church towers, and, remarkably, many had no face and no hands at all. Their only task was to strike a bell at the right moment, so the whole town could hear the hours ring out across the rooftops. Some towns went further, building dazzling astronomical clocks that showed not just the hour but the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars, glittering mechanical wonders that drew crowds of amazed onlookers. In time, clockmakers added a dial and a single hand to point at the hour. For centuries, that 1-hour hand was all anyone had, and it was enough because no one yet lived their life by the minute. Only later, as clocks grew more accurate, did a second, longer hand appear to count the minutes, and later still a thin, racing hand for the seconds. Piece by piece, time was being sliced ever finer. The great leap came in the year 1656 when the Dutch scientist Christiaan Huygens built the first pendulum clock. A swinging pendulum keeps time with beautiful regularity, and clocks that once drifted by many minutes a day suddenly kept time to within seconds. This was the birth of the tall, stately grandfather clock ticking in the corner of the room, and for the first time people could truly trust a clock hour after hour, day after day. Next, time became something you could carry. By coiling a spring to drive a clock in place of a hanging weight, craftsmen shrank the machine small enough to slip into a pocket. The pocket watch turned time into a personal possession, a gleaming symbol of wealth and precision, tucked on a chain inside a gentleman's coat. Time was no longer only tolling from a distant tower. Now it ticked quietly in the palm of your hand. Yet one great challenge remained, and it was a deadly one. Far out on the open ocean, an accurate clock was the secret key to knowing your position, and no clock could keep steady time on a damp, pitching, temperature-swinging ship. Solving that took a lifetime of work by a self-taught English carpenter named John Harrison, whose marine chronometer at last kept near-perfect time across the roughest seas, saving countless sailors from being lost. The humble clock had become one of the most powerful tools on Earth. By now clocks were everywhere, and yet they still refused to agree with one another. Every town set its own time by its own local noon, the moment the sun stood highest overhead. So the clocks in one city might read 15 minutes apart from the clocks in the next town down the road. As long as people rarely traveled far or fast, none of this mattered. But that was about to change with terrifying speed. The railway changed everything. Trains now thundered between cities in a matter of hours, and a timetable was worthless if every town kept a different time. Worse still, trains sharing the same tracks but running to different clocks could collide. So the railways forced the world to do something radical, to agree on a single standard time shared across whole regions. Nations sliced the map into time zones, each keeping one official time. Clocks were synchronized down the telegraph wires, all set to a master clock, most famously the Great Observatory at Greenwich. For the first time in history, the entire world began to tick, more or less, together. And so, step by step, from a shadow on the ground to water dripping in the dark, to sand and fire and swinging pendulums, and at last to atomic clocks so precise they lose barely a second in millions of years, humans slowly tamed the one thing no one can ever hold. Today, time glows on every wrist and every screen, so exact and so constant that we scarcely think of it at all. But the next time you glance at a clock and watch the minutes tick past, remember this: for almost the whole of human history, no such thing existed. People read the sky, listened for the bell, and watched the sand fall, and somehow they were never quite out of time. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe, and we'll keep uncovering how people really lived before the modern age.